For those of you who are tired of or just not fans of all the pumpkin and apple stuff that you're seeing now that fall's arrived, let's change it up a little bit. This is an oatmeal banana cake with cream cheese frosting that I got from AliciaLynn. She made it for 6 bites or blue points. I'm going to make it for 3. You can even do it for 2. And I'll show you how coming up next. Hello and welcome to my kitchen. My name is Roy. I am a home cook and amateur baker, and I am here on this channel sharing recipes that have helped me to lose over 125 pounds, whether those recipes are mine or someone else's. Now today is someone else's recipe. This one comes from AliciaLynn on YouTube. I don't know if any of you follow her as well. She has a lot of great recipes, and I've been following her since early on in my journey. And I will leave the link to her video for this recipe down in the description box, and you can go there and print out the recipe. Now I am making a few slight changes, and there is going to be one ingredient that may surprise you if you've been watching this channel at all. But I will get to that in a moment. This is for, I haven't even told you what it's for yet, AliciaLynn's oatmeal banana cake with cream cheese frosting. Now the ingredients for the frosting are over here, just 4 ingredients. These are the ingredients for the cake, so let me go over those. I have 3 medium bananas. She had 4 small ones. She said 4 small or 3 medium. I have a 1/3 cup of maple syrup, and here's my first change from her recipe. Because she doesn't typically use artificial sweeteners, I'm using sugar-free maple syrup, and she used regular maple syrup. So that's 1/3 cup of sugar-free maple syrup, 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. I have 3/4 cups of old-fashioned oats here, but the recipe calls for quick oats. And I know I've shown this in another video before, but I'm going to show you again how to quickly turn these into quick oats if you don't have a mini food processor. Because the last time I showed it, I just buzzed them up a little bit in the food processor, just quickly to not make them powdery, but to chop them up a little bit. I'm going to show you how to do it without a mini food processor this time. We have 1 cup of non-fat Greek yogurt. I use Fage 0. That's just my preferred, but whatever one you use. 2 eggs, and again, I've cracked them before I got on camera. I can't believe it. I have 2 teaspoons of unsweetened applesauce. Now in her recipe, she used coconut oil. I'm getting rid of that and using the applesauce instead. We have 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, a teaspoon of baking soda, and a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, and then 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. Now that's for the cake. For the frosting, I'm using another change. She used reduced fat cream cheese from the store, and you know I do not go for that. I am using my light homemade cream cheese, and if you don't know what that is, I'm going to leave a card right here to show you the tutorial. I took it out of my introductory video and made it its own separate tutorial. So I will link that there and down in the description box below. Definitely a game changer. I think a lot of people have been using that quite a bit. I think it's one of the favorite recipes on here. I have a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Here I have 2 tablespoons. She called for 1/8 cup, which is 2 tablespoons of just the non-fat Greek yogurt. That's just to help thin out the cream cheese frosting a little bit. She says you could also use 1 to 2 tablespoons of almond milk. I would probably err on going with the 1 tablespoon so that it's not too thin. but that's why I'm using the non-fat Greek yogurt instead. I'd rather have it a little thicker, and the cream cheese will be thinned by the Greek yogurt, but not thin it out a lot. Now here is the surprise for those of you who have been following me. You know my preferred sweetener is Swerve. And I often use the Swerve confectioner sugar in a lot of frostings. However, my partner Paul is not a fan. Just saw a squirrel out the window, sorry, my ADD went whoop. My partner Paul is not a fan of sweet artificial sweeteners when you can taste them. Like baked in things, he's fine. But when you can actually taste them, they're not cooked in like a frosting, he's not a fan. So I'm actually using half a cup of real confectioner sugar. I know. Calm down, people, it's gonna be fine. This change, if I use the Swerve, I would have reduced this by 1 bite or Blue Point. And I've actually cut down the points and bites a lot from her recipe, because this cake will serve 12, and each one of her slices was 6 bites or 6 Blue Points. I have gotten it down with real confectioner sugar to 3. If you use Swerve or another powdered sugar replacement, it would go down to 2. So that's your call. I've decided to be kind to Paul, and I'm being kind to myself by not doing half and half like I did with the pumpkin caramel bars. And if you didn't see that one, you should definitely check that out. And I have a 9x13 baking dish that I've sprayed with Pam baking spray. I prefer using this for baking, but you could use regular cooking spray. The one thing you want to make sure of is that you spray well in the corners, because a lot of times those places get missed, and that's where things like to stick. So make sure that you get into those corners and don't spill your confectioner sugar all over. All right, so let me move a few things around and we will get started on the cake. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to start with is getting these old-fashioned oats turned into quick oats, basically. But quick oats cook more quickly because they are smaller. So I typically will run these pulse maybe 3 or 4 times in my mini food processor. But maybe you don't have one. Maybe it's on the fritz. Maybe you don't feel like breaking it out. This is what you can do instead, is just chop it by hand. So I'm going to bring these together and chop it gently, because I tend to get a little aggressive and then things go flying. So I'm going to try to be a little more gentle. And you don't have to get crazy with making sure everyone's chopped precisely, and see they're bouncing around a little bit, but that's to be expected. So I'm not trying to get all of the oats fine. I'm just trying to get a lot of them chopped up so that they will cook quicker inside of our cake. And see, they're still flying even though I'm trying to be gentle. So I just can't make a dish without making a mess. That's what I do. All right, so that looks good enough to me. So let me scoop this into our bowl, bring in the other ingredients, and we will continue with the cake. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do now that we've gotten our oats down to quick oat size is mix all of our dry ingredients together. The oats, the flour, the baking soda, the baking powder. Now, I know I've addressed this in previous videos, the cinnamon and the salt, why you would use both baking powder and baking soda. And that is because, you go over here. And that is because if there is an acidic component, something has to counteract that acid. And with the yogurt and the bananas, there is some acidity in this dish. So one of those will counteract the acid while the other one gets to work. I kind of equated it the last time I spoke about, say, two twins, fraternal twins, because baking powder is pretty much the same as baking soda. It just has additives to it. So let's say you have these two fraternal twins. They want to play a little prank. They want to get a little something done. One of them is going to go distract the adult in the room while the other one gets to work. That's kind of what's happening here with the baking soda and baking powder. One of them is distracting all the acids so that the other one can actually help the cake to rise. I hope that makes sense. If not, I'll try to come up with some other analogy, but that's the best I can do at the moment. Anyways, we're just going to whisk these together. You always want to whisk. I don't sift very often. Usually what I'll do is just put everything into a bowl and whisk it, because sifting is just meant to aerate the flour and get it fluffy. And this not only does that, but it also helps to combine everything in a homogeneous way. And of course, I throw stuff out of the bowl. Told you, can't make a cake without making a mess, or anything for that matter. All right, so our dries are together. Let me get the wet and we will move on. Okay, so my arms have been a little wonky. I've had a few neck cramps and it's just been a lot of fun. And transporting this over, I ended up spilling half of the vanilla. So I'm just going to add a bit more. As long as I don't add the whole bottle, we'll be fine. And just so you know, if you don't feel like getting a teaspoon measure out, you can usually use the cap. This cap is a little bigger than most caps for vanilla, so I'd probably use about half of this. But vanilla is one of those things where I wouldn't worry about being too precise. A little extra vanilla never hurt anyone. Well, I don't know that for sure, but I can't imagine how it would. So I've peeled and broken up the bananas. I'm just going to mash them with my mixer a little bit before I start blending them. That way it's a little easier to blend and you're not trying to break through this giant banana. Well, not giant, you know what I mean? Or maybe you don't. I don't know. Anyway, so I'm going to whip this up into a creamy paste, but I'm going to either turn down the volume or just skip ahead, depending on how long it takes. Be right back. All right, so there we have our mashed banana. You could mash them by hand, obviously. I just figured since I'm going to be mixing this up anyway, I would do it this way. All right, so we're just going to add in the rest of the ingredients now that the banana is broken up. The eggs, the maple syrup, and again, I'm using sugar-free. So this is 0 Bites, the one I use, which I've mentioned before, and I'm not sponsored, is Vermont brand. And the cup of Greek yogurt. Now this has been sitting out at room temperature just to make it easier to incorporate. I've mentioned before, but it's always good to repeat it. Room temperature ingredients, especially for baking, are best because when they're all one temperature, they're more likely to combine more easily. So it's best to have them at room temperature and things come together. If a cold egg gets in there and it's all stiff and gelled and doesn't want to break apart, it's much easier when it's at room temperature. So room temperature ingredients are the best: the applesauce and the vanilla. And I'm just going to mix this up. So again, I'll either turn down the volume or just skip ahead. Okay, that's all there is to it. It's a nice liquid mixture here. Let me move this aside and get rid of these. So now I'm going to bring in my spatula again, because Alicia Lynn suggests, and it usually is a good idea, to gently mix the dry into the wet, because if you overmix a cake, what happens is you form gluten by the flour getting worked and worked and worked. And this isn't about gluten allergies. This is about making the cake tough. Because so this is a cake, you want it to be tender. And if you went too far with the mixing, it would become more dense like a bread. So you don't want that. So it's best to gently incorporate the dry and wet together so you don't form any gluten and get a tough cake. Same goes for muffins, anything that has a tender texture. You don't want to overmix it because that's going to make it tough. So now bring in my pan and pray I do not drop this, and just load up our 9x13 pan. And you know me, I'm greedy, I gotta get all of it out. And then we're just going to smooth it out a little bit. And make sure you push it into the corners, because a lot of times, I don't know if you've ever made a cake in a pan like this, and it's well domed, but then the corners get really thin. It's because when you put it in the oven, you hadn't pushed it into the corners enough, and it had already started to bake before it was willing to spread out. So that is always a good idea when you're working with a square or rectangular pan, to make sure that you get it into the corners. Now the other thing, because this is so liquid, I'm just going to give it a little shimmy just to make sure it evens out a little bit, and any excessive air bubbles inside can come to the surface a little bit and pop. Say there are a couple of little dots there. I don't know if you can see that a couple little bubbles came up and burst. That way they're not inside your cake making big holes. So this is going to go into a 375-degree oven for 20 to 25 minutes until a toothpick in the center comes out clean. And there's also a touch test that I showed on the pumpkin caramel bars. That's another option if you don't have toothpicks, so you don't want to worry about buying toothpicks or breaking them out. So check out that video for that little tidbit on the touch test, as I call it. Now I'm going to put this in for 12 minutes first, and then when it's reached that 12 minutes, I'm going to turn the pan like this. It's always best, whatever you're baking, cakes, breads, muffins, whatever, to rotate halfway through, because every oven is different and there could be hot spots, so it might be hotter over here, and this side isn't getting as much heat. So I don't know if you've ever taken a cake out and one side was much darker than the other. It's because you have a hot spot in your oven. So if you just rotate halfway through, it then shifts this over to the cooler side and gets this into the hot spot. So it'll be a little more even. So I'm going to do that halfway through, and I will be back when it comes out of the oven. All right, ladies and gentlemen, there is the oatmeal banana cake portion of the program. Now, you want to make sure you put down pot holders or mitts or whatever, just to remind you that this is hot, because I have made that mistake before. So this now has to, sadly, cool completely. So that'll be probably about 2 hours before I feel comfortable frosting it. Because if you frost it too soon, what's going to happen is the cream cheese frosting is just going to melt and kind of seep into the cake and make it kind of gummy. You don't want the gummy cake. So let it cool completely. It's going to be, like I said, about 2 hours. And then I will be back to show you how to do the frosting and get this baby ready. See you soon. Okay, so it has been about 2 hours. The cake is nicely cooled. So I'm going to just throw all of the frosting ingredients into this bowl and just whip it up real quick. So we have 4 ounces of the light homemade cream cheese. And if you need the recipe, it is on my blog along with all of my recipes. I sometimes forget to say that. And in case you haven't noticed, I'm having a few difficulties since the 2 hours have elapsed. My body decided to rebel a little bit, but I am pushing on. That's what we do around here. We just push on. All right, so the cream cheese, the Greek yogurt, and the ½ teaspoon of vanilla. And now I'm gonna whisk these 3 things together before I add in the powdered sugar. I don't know why I keep trying to whisk on the counter because it makes such a racket. All right, so you may notice that I have my powdered sugar in a little sieve on a bowl, because powdered sugar is one of those things you definitely want to sift, because if you get clumps, they're not going to break apart that easily, and it goes much more smoothly if you have the powdered sugar sifted. Now let me grab a spoon real quick, because that'll make it a little easier to sift this. I'll show you in a second. All right, so we're going to take our spoon, and if you've seen the old sifters where they had like a little hand crank, it had like a little whisk inside of it to move stuff around. That's kind of what we'll be approximating with a spoon, by just stirring the powdered sugar so that it's going to go through the sieve a little more quickly than it would have by just tapping it. Okay, so that's in there, and any little residuals I'm throwing in there. And like I said before, this is actual confectioner sugar. It's not Swerve. And I'm willing to take that bite or point because it'll save me some heartache of trying to either convince Paul to ignore the aftertaste of the sweetener, or coming up with multiple frostings for the sand cake. But just till it comes together. Okay, so bring in the cake. And all you're gonna do is just frost as usual. Now this isn't a heavy frosting. You don't need like a big ton of frosting. If you're using the light homemade cream cheese, you could add a little bit extra and not worry about it. So you're just going to spread this around as evenly as you can. And the cake has pulled away from the sides of the pan, which is a lot of the time when you know that a cake is done. It pulls away from the sides. And considering I've been having a few issues, like my neck keeps seizing up on me here, I'm not going to try to get overly concerned with how pretty this looks, because I know it'll be tasty regardless. There you have it. The oatmeal banana cake with cream cheese frosting from AliciaLynn. So let me slice this up into the 12 servings, show you the size of the portion that you can get, and then we will go over the nutrition and all of those fun little things. Be right back. Okay, so I have my handy dandy fish spatula, which, as many of you know, is not used for fish because I do not do seafood, but it is great for taking out little bits of cakes and things from this pan or lasagna or whatever I make. But there you have the oatmeal banana cake with cream cheese frosting from AliciaLynn. So like I said, because I use the confectioner sugar, this is going to be 3 bites. And if you used a sugar replacement for the confectioner sugar, it would only be 2. Now the calories, as I've made it with the actual confectioner sugar, calories would be 147. Fat would be 1.4 grams. Carbs would be 27.3 grams. And protein would be 6.8 grams. And that's with actual confectioner sugar. If you use Swerve or another confectioner sugar replacement, like I said, this would drop to 2 bites or blue points, and the calories would drop, honestly, just by 20. So it would be 127 calories for this. The fat and protein would remain the same. Fat would be 1.4 grams, and the protein would be 6.8 grams. And the carbs would actually go up by 1 gram. The carbs would be 28.3. But it is a delicious little snack. If you have some leftover bananas that are just going to go bad, turn them into a delicious cake. That's what I always say. Well, not always, but I say it usually. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and you are looking for recipes that can help you on a weight loss journey. And hit the notification bell for the next time I upload any sort of video. And comment down below if you've tried this. If you subscribe to the AliciaLynn channel, let me know what you think of the changes I've made. It's about half the bites, half the blue points as I made it. But again, like I said, she doesn't typically use sugar replacements. And also, please follow me over on social media. Here is my Instagram handle here. And there are 2 Facebook groups that I am part of. One is mine, Recipes with Roy. And the other one is Finding Our Way, W-E-I-G-H. And that one I co-admin with Jennifer Lynn from the Jennifer Lynn channel, as well as Bree Coleman from Balancing a Life with Bree. So I'm going to go and serve Paul this surprise treat. He doesn't know I used real sugar this time. And I'm going to enjoy a piece myself. So until next time, bye.